Welcome to a bonus episode of the Remarkable Retail Podcast presented by MarketDial. Steve and I are excited to take the podcast to the World Retail Congress at the Hotel Arts in Barcelona, April 25th, 27th. Steve will also be joining an amazing roster of speakers to present his take on why organizations need to radically accelerate their pace of transformation. In advance of the show, we connected with some of Steve's fellow speakers for a quick preview of what they will be discussing in Spain. Stay tuned to the end of the podcast to learn more about the World Retail Congress event. On this special episode, Suzanne Long, Chief Sustainability and Transformation Officer, Albertsons. Suzanne joined the new Albertsons Companies in 2012, leading 5 major acquisitions and integrations that grew the company to America's second-largest food and drug retailer. She now serves as the company's first Chief Sustainability and Transformation Officer, responsible for driving both the company's ESG strategy and a variety of enterprise-wide strategic initiatives.
Well, Michael and I are delighted to welcome Suzanne Long from the Albertsons Company to our podcast. Hello, Suzanne. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I understand you are not in the office today. We find you, I think, in Chicago. Is that right?
That's correct. I'm at our Jewel Osco division.
Well, I lived in Chicago for many, many years, and so I spent a lot of time at the Jewel, not too far from where I lived. But anyway, I hope you are enjoying Chicago. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk a little bit about you and the World Retail Congress. So before we jump into some more of that, can you just tell us a little bit about your personal and professional journey and the work you do at Albertsons?
Sure. So my professional journey is that I started my career with Accenture, doing process design, change management, mergers and acquisitions for financial services companies. And a few years into that journey, I actually moved to Idaho, which is where I was originally from. And Albertsons, the old Albertsons, was actually based there. And I got a job there doing that same work that I had been doing for Accenture, but now working for Albertsons. And so worked in a variety of capacities for the company, including building and leading the Lean Six Sigma program for them over a number of years. And I did that until about 2008, and then actually left to go back into consulting for a number of years and worked with companies like Kroger and Staples, Office Depot, variety of other retailers. And then actually came back to Albertsons in 2012. And at that time, Albertsons was actually just down to 200 stores and about $3 billion in sales. And over the successive 3 years, we actually acquired, if you can believe this, about 2,300 stores. We acquired some stores from a company called SuperValue. We acquired United Supermarkets. And then our biggest acquisition was Safeway, actually. And so in 3 years, we went from 200 stores and $3 billion in sales to about 2,500 stores and $65 billion in sales. And my job was the integration. And so I had to stitch the company quilt together, is what I call it. So after a few years of that and a lot of gray hair later, I actually was put in charge of strategic sourcing for Albertsons, which is where we buy all of the products that we need for our business, but we don't resell to customers. So things like bakery tables and bakery ovens and shelf tags and gloves in the deli, front end bags, all of those kinds of things. And then actually was asked to take on sustainability and ESG as a responsibility. And then about a year and a half ago was named the Chief Sustainability and Transformation Officer. So that's sort of my career in a nutshell.
Wow, it's quite a diverse journey. Now, you alluded to this, but since we have a global audience, maybe just kind of a few more facts about the breadth of the company. And you already talked about this. A lot of people just think of Albertsons as that particular nameplate, but obviously there are several. So anything else you want to add just about the scale and scope of the company and how it's evolved?
Sure. It did grow so substantially, right, between 2013 and 2017, as I mentioned. But I would say, the interesting thing about Albertsons Company is we're oftentimes the biggest company no one's ever heard of. We're currently over $70 billion in sales, 2,300 locations in 34 states. And the reason that most people aren't familiar with us is because we operate under 22 different names. So as I mentioned earlier, currently I'm in Chicago, where we're known by the name Jewel Osco. But in Southern California, where I was yesterday, we go by Albertsons, Vaughn's, Pavilions, other places were known by Albertsons, other places, Randall's or Tom Thumb or Shaw's. So because we go by so many different names and people think of us as their local grocery store, people often don't know that we're actually a very large company.
Let's talk about, we're going to be together in Barcelona. Let's talk about what takes you from the U.S. to speak at the World Retail Congress. Grocery in Europe, such a fascinating business. And of course, sustainability in Europe is front and center in many aspects. So I guess I don't think I'm answering my own question, but talk about what brings you to the World Retail Congress.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First, we are such a large player. And I think knowing that how much our business has changed over even just the last, 5 to 7 years is pretty remarkable. And that has everything to do with, even though we have brands that we've had for, over 100 years in some cases, the company as it currently exists is only a few years old. We're just in grade school now, right? I mean, we've only been sort of in our current shape for a handful of years. And yet I think that we've shaped a very strategic future in our business. And one of our areas of focus and strategy is ESG or sustainability. And we call that our recipe for change, the focus that we have on that area. And I think part of the power of the story is that, we had done sustainability in some capacity for years. But what's really changed in the last few years is becoming far more strategic in our efforts, really focusing on the areas where we can show true leadership and innovation. And then I think most importantly is for us, it's not just something that we're saying we're going to do, we're actually doing it. Our say-do ratio in sustainability and really in all areas of our business is I think, pretty remarkable. And there's something very personal about food and how people connect with it. And I think as people feel more and more connected to the concept of sustainability, what that means for planet and people and products, I think explaining it and talking about it from the position of a food company makes it feel much more real than maybe it does in a lot of other industries.
It's a small word, but it has such far-reaching implications. Maybe you could spend a minute or two unpacking what sustainability, how do you look at it as different components? I mean, there's moving the goods, there's the sourcing of the goods, and then there's the selling of the goods, everything from, the refrigerators to the trucks to working with partners. You're a massive business that sells and measures in tonnage of product that you move. How do you just compartmentalize or at least break that down so you can get your arms around such a big task in a small word?
Yeah, what a great question. So, the way I think about it is we're part of a food system, right? And effectively what we are is there's a bunch of product that is manufactured upstream of us, whether it's grown on a tree, right, put in a box, wrapped in a bag, all of those CPG companies, the food manufacturers, all of that happens upstream of us. And then all the consumption actually happens downstream of us. And we are a big box in which all of that just passes through, right? Where there's some things we make, of course, in our stores, our bread or, fresh salads out of the produce that we buy. But the large majority of what we sell in our stores is created upstream of us and consumed downstream. And so we have to think about our sustainability footprint, both from that systems perspective, but then also just within what's happening within our four walls, right? And so in the sustainability industry, the upstream and downstream is what they call scope 3, right? It's not in our direct control, but it's certainly within our footprint. And then what happens inside the four walls of our stores or our distribution centers or on our trucks is, what people will refer to as scope 1 and scope 2, but that's basically what's the footprint of our own operations. And so to be able to actually make headway, we have to think about those things as connected, but separate, right? So there's ways to influence upstream and downstream, but we can control what's directly in our operations. And so just as an illustration, we've decided that climate action is one of the 4 key priority areas that we have for our ESG agenda, for our recipe for change agenda. And within climate action, I think if you ask people, what is it that, what's the carbon footprint of a grocery store? I think most people would say, oh, it's the trucks that, take the goods from the distribution centers into the grocery stores. But in our internal footprint, actually, those trucks only represent, and the fuel that they consume represent 3% of our carbon footprint. 86% of our carbon footprint is actually made up of the energy that we use and the refrigerants that are in our, throughout our stores. And Europe has actually tackled this problem tremendously well over the last decade. They're really leading, and we actually look to Europe for a lot of the solutions that we're trying to implement. But there are differences in the way the infrastructure, for example, works in many places in the US. And so we're having to look at innovation and then figure out how are we going to tailor that innovation to our business. And our goal, for example, is we're going to reduce our carbon footprint by 47% from a baseline year of 2019 to 2030. And I'm really proud to share that just between 2019 and 2021, we've already reduced our carbon footprint in our own operations by 19%. So 19 out of 47, we've already sort of knocked off. So it's we're on a great trajectory, but we have a lot more work to do.
Let's talk about what you're talking about on stage at the World Retail Congress. A little sneak preview, just so folks have a sense of what kind of knowledge you'll be dropping on the stage.
You bet. Well, there's a number of things. I think, first of all, this notion that just a few short years ago, we were doing work in sustainability, but it wasn't a key part of our strategy and focus. And then how do you go from there to, now being able to share the statistic I just gave, right? In a very short period of time, how do you start to transform the business so that you can not only make promises of what you will do, but you can actually prove it through the results? And I think there's a lot of companies that have made big commitments, and not all of them are sure how they're going to actually hit those. And, as I shared earlier, my background is not in sustainability specifically. It's in change management and business transformation and large scale change, right? How do you take the gnarliest problems, right? Stitching together the quilt of a $65 billion company, for example, and break it into bite-sized pieces that 5 years later, we look back and we say, that work is done. We are a combined, well-operating company. And so I think the same is true for sustainability, is sharing with people the story of how do you quickly go from, lack of clarity on the ESG strategy to creating one, to action, and being able to share that story and that journey, and that it is possible.
Well, it's such an impressive track record you've already had. And we're just speaking for myself, I'm very excited to hear the whole presentation when we see you in Barcelona. Is there anything else about the World Retail Congress that you're looking forward, any sessions or particular things you're hoping to get out of your attendance there beyond all the wisdom you're going to share?
Well, I hope that it's seen as wisdom. I guess we'll see in a couple of weeks. But
if this is any indication, I think it's going to be pretty impactful.
Well, I'm certainly excited to glean the wisdom of others, for sure. And I think one of the things that excites me most about the ESG and sustainability space and the opportunity to be at an event like the World Retail Congress is, I think this is a space where people understand that collaboration is key. There's so many places in business where we're also fiercely competitive, which is, of course, what makes, business strong. But we feel that we have to invent the wheel ourselves, that if it's not invented here, it's not a good idea. And I think we think that, success comes from what we can do internally. And I just think ESG is one of these spaces that opens us up to say, we are part of a food system, for example, right? And it's not just what we do in that food system. It's all the things that are done upstream of us and all the things that are consumed downstream of us. And how can we be rethinking that system to make us all better? And how can we collaborate with even companies that might typically be seen as a competitor to say, we're solving the same problem. The magic of competitiveness will come in the execution of what we do, not in the idea of how we should do it. And so I think there's tremendous collaboration and conversation that can happen. And so that's what I'm excited about at the conference.
A fantastic conversation in the vernacular. It's grade A wisdom that I think both on the podcast and that we'll be hearing in Barcelona. So Suzanne, thanks so much for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Real treat to hear your voice and get a glimpse of what you will be talking about, and then looking forward to meeting you in person. So thanks again so much for joining Steve and I on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Since 2007, World Retail Congress has been the premier platform for in-depth research, content, and events, driving retail growth and inspiring valuable global connections. The Congress unites leaders from across the global industry for innovative, groundbreaking strategies and insights to drive success. It's the unrivaled, high-level forum for senior retailers to learn, share insights, form powerful connections, and play a key part in shaping the future of global retail. Learn more today at worldretailcongress.com.